Okay, greetings and blessings to each one here. Good to see you all here this morning. So for one verse to introduce the subject I want to talk about this morning, you can open your Bible to the book of Proverbs, and the verse is verse 3. Proverbs 31 and verse 3. Proverbs 31, verse 3. Do not give your wealth to women, nor your heart or life to remorse. I think the King James says something like, do not give your virtue to women. In fact, I wrote down a couple of different versions of what it says. Does somebody have the King James? I actually left it at my seat. I had it in a screenshot of it. Someone have the King James version of Proverbs 31:3. Okay. Okay. All right. Give not your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroys kings. So basically, the different renditions, it looked like three different translations, four or so, actually. And they all had the same concept of something to the effect of, don't give your strength to women, don't give your ways to women, don't give your wealth to women, don't give your vigor, don't give your heart, don't give your life, because essentially what will happen is it'll destroy you, all the way to loss of life and kingdom. So it's interesting when you think about that men who give their vitality and who they are to a multiplicity of women, notice it's plural. When men give who they are, their strength, their life, their vigor, their heart, whatever it may be, when they give it to a multiplicity of women, it destroys them. It completely diminishes who they are. So not surprising that in the same chapter, the antidote to the problem is also given. So let's read now, starting in verse 10, and we'll read to the end of the chapter. So 31:10 through to the end. Now bear in mind when we read this that this is a piece of literature that employs a literary technique that the literary technique is actually lost in translation, but it's, again, a piece of literature that employs a literary technique in order to create a beautiful poetic passage. So we're not building doctrine upon this that, every verse, every line has to be, you, or you're not the person that you should be. But rather, it's an inspiring picture of a virtuous woman. And I think that when you read this, probably all the sisters here desire to be that person. I think I would be if I'd be a sister. When I read this, I'd probably look at this and say, I want to be that person. She's awesome. So listen to this. I'm reading this in the Septuagint, so it'll be a little different in King James or ESV. Who will find a courageous wife? For such a one is more valuable than precious stones. The heart of her husband trusts in her. She will not be at loss for fine spoils. For she provides good things for her husband all her life. She weaves wool and linen cloth, and is productive with her hands. She's like a ship trading afar off. So she procures her livelihood. She also rises before dawn and gives food to her household and appoints tasks for her maidservants. Seeing a farm, she buys it, and from the fruit of her hand she plants her plot of land. Strongly girding her loins, she strengthens her arms for work. She experiences work as a good thing, and her lamp is not quenched all night. She extends her arms to do profitable things, and she applies her hands to the spindle. She opens her hands to the poor, and she reaches out with her fruit to the needy. Her husband is not anxious about those at home. When he spends a long time elsewhere, her husband is not anxious about those at home when he spends a long time elsewhere. For all her household are clothed. She makes a double upper garment for her husband, and garments of fine linen and purple for herself. Her husband is respected at the gates, and when he sits in council with the elders who inhabit the land. She makes and sells fine linen and girdles to the Canaanites. She opens her mouth carefully and lawfully and controls her tongue. She clothes herself with strength and dignity and rejoices in the last days. She runs her household carefully, and she does not eat the bread of idleness. She opens her mouth wisely and lawfully, and her charity raises her children, and they become rich. And her husband praises her. Many daughters acquire riches, many do mighty things. But you excel and surpass all. Desires to please are deceitful, and the beauty of a wife is vain. For a wise wife is blessed, and let her in fear praise the Lord. Give to her from the fruits of her hands, and let her husband praise her at the gates. So again, contrasting 31:3 to 31:10 through the end, you see a picture here of a man dispersing who he is, his strength, his wealth, his vitality, to a multiplicity of women, and it destroys him, all the way to the loss of life and kingdom. The reverse of that is that if a man pours his heart and life and soul into a virtuous woman, she exponentially increases his strength. So I'm not as strong as I was at 44, 25 years ago when I was 19. I was an incredibly strong, fit young man. And today, physically, I've lost a lot of that. But my strength has been increased exponentially over the last 25 years by pouring it into one woman. And she has brought children into this world, and through them, my strength is, to a factor of 7 from what I as an individual am. So see how this is working, right? When a man distributes who he is to a multiplicity of women, it brings him to nothing. When a man puts it into one virtuous woman, it makes him everything. History is actually replete with examples of how a man was diminished by his propensity to pour into women. Solomon being a prime example of that. The loss of his righteousness and ultimately the loss and division of the kingdom can probably be pointed directly to that one area of, though he was a wise man, to just a genuine, may I say it, stupidity regarding his relationship with women. You can also think of the story of Judith, which is in an apocryphal book, that she single-handedly takes on Nebuchadnezzar's general and destroys him because he's a man that apparently has a pattern of being seduced by women, and that she uses her, who she is, to destroy him. And another one might be the example of the Canaanite men, who the Moabites come in, and soon the men are chasing the Moabitish women, and the destruction begins in the camp. And it wasn't until Phinehas takes this drastic action of destroying evil that God turns around the plague. But again, it's this men who were unfaithful and putting their strength and vitality towards an unvirtuous woman. It brings destruction. So again, the alternative, or I'm sorry, the opposite is true, where a righteous man pursuing righteousness, putting his life and energy into a virtuous woman, exponentially increases who he is. In fact, I think women are so powerful in this because it's something that I've observed that women can take very little and make a lot with it. We grew up, some of us grew up with around a family where the husband was an unfaithful man, a very dysfunctional man in many ways, and yet the woman with her strength, her dignity, and her grace, to see today what those men and children, actually, they have 4 children, to see what those children have made of themselves in spite of who their father was. The mother has turned into good. And women are incredibly powerful in that way. And rarely do you actually see the opposite, where an unfaithful wife, where the father can like overcome that influence and actually create faithful children. Usually it's, but many times a wife can redeem a situation. I'm not saying a man can't, but you actually see it less. And we see many times that women, given the little bit they have to work with, can redeem situations and bring their children into a good place and actually help their children to really make something of themselves. So that's a blessing and encouragement for those who maybe don't have solid husbands, you might say. So just a few observations that comes out of Proverbs 31. Again, this is not doctrine. We're not building a case that you have to have all these characteristics coming out of your life in order to really be a virtuous woman. But it's a picture of a woman that's strong and effective, for sure effective in what she does. So we see immeasurable value. Her value is much more than precious stones. So a virtuous woman is of immeasurable value. She's also trustworthy. It says the heart of her husband trusts in her. In 12 to 14, the word productive comes to mind. In fact, it says that in the Septuagint. It says she's productive. Rises before dawn. You see all this productivity coming out of her life. Seeing a farm, she buys it. Still waiting for the farm, hon. Haven't seen that yet. But she does raise chickens, so I guess she is doing some type of agriculture. See dedication and commitment. Her lamp goes not out by night. There's just nothing like off duty. There she is, always on call, always on duty. She makes her husband respected. Verse 22, her husband is respected at the gates when he sits in council with the elders of the land. She makes and sells fine linens and girdles to the Canaanites. She opens her mouth carefully and lawfully. Something interesting that you notice here when you look at what's going on. I love that where it says she sells girdles to the Canaanites. The Canaanites were the enemy, right? And here she is. She's going out and selling to the Canaanites. She's not selling to her peers around her, the other Hebrews. She probably is, but she's selling to the enemy. Like, here's the enemy. All right, I'm going to go out and sell to him. You see margin in her life, I think, and margin is something that's engineered. Margin is not something that happens by accident. There's the margin, the ability to deal with the contingencies of life is something that you build into your life. It's not something that you fall into. Sometimes Roxanne looks at other ladies and says, I get nothing done compared to them. They're just like so disciplined, so effective, so inspiring for what they accomplish. And then there's people that look at her and say, wow, she gets a lot done, right? So there's a spectrum. There is that, and that's perfectly fine. The point is to take what you have, what's been given to you, and build your own margin out of that. And that often involves getting rid of bad habits, getting rid of things that waste time, getting rid of things that detract from productivity, and basically using energy for that which is needed, rather than that which is taken care of, maybe like selfishness. She's not idle. You see that here. Someone that's not, she's busy with her hands. She's not idle. Sometimes it's fun to watch my wife or daughters work in the kitchen or somewhere. Do you ever see how fast their hands can move, like with kitchen knives, things like that? It's like I got a kitchen knife, I'm going to try to cut something out. I don't know. Bruce is someone that works in the kitchen. He's probably really good at it. But like I'm so clumsy with a knife. But you watch my wife or daughters with a kitchen knife, it's like, whoa, how do you not cut yourself? Right? It's incredible to to see how good women are with their hands. Finally, last observation here is that people see and praise virtue. It's something that's obvious. A woman doesn't have to go around saying, hey, look how virtuous I am. It's something that's so obvious. It says her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband praises her. Virtue is something that it speaks for itself. She doesn't have to show her own virtue or display her own virtue. Others will do it for her. Okay, so that's all I had prepared for this morning. Brother Raymond is planning to preach today, so I'm going to give the time to him here. But I just love the picture that's given here in this chapter. That picture that if a man, again, I'll just repeat, that if a man distributes who he is, attempts to distribute who he is to a multiplicity of women, it'll bring him to nothing. But if a man pours himself into a virtuous woman, it greatly increases who he is. So let's thank God for the faithful and virtuous sisters. Why don't we stand for prayer?